The last in our series of videos regarding properties that we can assign to objects is line weight. And if we go up here to line weight, we see by layer, and again we'll talk about by layer a little bit later on. We have the ability to control the weight or the thickness of our lines that we draw. We use color and line type and line weight to distinguish lines in a drawing, to make them stand out accordingly to our industry standards. If I just set our line weight to 0.6 millimeters, and we can change whether these measurements are in millimeters or inches using this line type settings or line weight settings. I'm going to leave that alone for right now and just realize that most, if you think back in old manual drafting days of using ink pens, we had ink pens that were like a line weight of 1, 2, a 0 or an aught or a double aught. We had our pens that we used were different thicknesses, and they were always measured in millimeters. So I just leave this alone because I am an old man and I did a lot of manual drafting with ink pens on Mylar on a drafting board, and this is very familiar to me. If you want to switch it out, we'll visit this dialog box in a few minutes. But I'll pick and set 0.6 as my current line weight, and I'm going to change my line type back to continuous, just a solid line, and I'll change the color to, we'll just change our color back to white, okay? And now I'll draw a line, and you'll see how much heavier or weightier it shows up. See that? Oh geez, I guess it's not. Okay, here's why it's not. If you remember in one of our setup videos earlier, we talked about different buttons down here to to set to have them appear in our status bar, and one of them was line weight, okay, or line weight display. Notice that it's off right now. If I pull this up, you will see line weight display. So if you haven't done that, make sure that that's checked so that that button appears right here, and then pick it so that that is on, and you can see that now I'm drawing with a thicker line weight, and they'll plot out that way, whether we're plotting to a PDF or whether we're drawing or plotting to an actual printer or a plotter. That line weight will be realized on the drawings, okay, and be seen on the screen. And then if I zoom in, notice that it doesn't really get thicker, okay, it kind of reproportionalizes itself to the size of the screen. We don't want a solid white screen if I zoom in really tight on that. So that kind of resets itself, okay? To make that visible, every person's eyes are a little bit different than the next person's. So to realize line weights at the thickness that you would like to realize them, maybe that's a little thicker than what you would like, I can go down here and right click and pick line weight settings. There's that dialog box that we could get at from up here also when we were playing around up there. I'll pick this, and there's my little dialog box. There's another way to set line types, or excuse me, line weights. But then look at this adjust display scale. Right here, I pick that, and I can yank that in one direction or the other. If I go to max and say OK, it gets real thick. If I right click and line weight settings and I yank this back over here, if I go to minimum, we're not really going to see anything. It doesn't look any different than our normal thin line types. So what I usually do, because I do think that it was showing up a little bit thicker, it was kind of right in the middle before, I usually put it about 1, maybe 2, 2.5 notches up, okay, and say OK. And now it kind of shows up heavier, but not real thick, not magic marker type heavy, but just a little bit heavier than what we want. Now that setting that we just set is setting AutoCAD to be that way. That's not something that we have to do in each drawing. Loading line types, that has to be done in every drawing. Changing line weights, that has to be done on a per object basis. We're going to talk about ways to manage all these properties much more easily than loading them every single time or manipulating this every time I want to make a change. We'll talk about using layers to handle that much more cleanly. But that change on that grab bar here, that is on a per station basis. So any drawings I start with within AutoCAD are always going to be over here. I don't have to change that every single time I do a drawing. So essentially that's line weight. Doesn't really matter. Again, I can do this changing it with this. Let's go to that 0.6 just so that we can see it. Okay. Or I can change it with quick properties also. Look at quick properties. Line weight's not handled quickly very often. Usually we just handle it on a by layer basis or by this, so it's not even worked into the scheme for quick properties. Later on I can maybe show you how to modify what's called the customizable user interface so that line type or line weight would show up, just like color and line type already show up. But for now, it's kind of beyond the scope of what we're doing. Realize that you can change your line weight up here, whether you pick it and change it or whether you make it current and then draw with that as the current line weight. But that's your overview of line weights.